Hello and welcome back to the channel. Penguin started a series in 1935 edited by Alan Lane, and this was before the invention of the ISBN system, which all published books have today, which catalogs them. But before the invention of ISBN, you had to have another way of numbering books in a series. And so between 1935 and 1969, Penguin, under the leadership of Alan Lane, published 3,000 books. Now, I started this series off with the plan to read or reread and discuss the first 1,000 books. But then I had a realization, and I want to quickly lay this out for you before we dive into a bunch of these gorgeous books from the series. First of all, you don't need to watch these videos in order. So every episode I will be discussing 10 books from this first 3,000. I've already done 3 episodes, and I basically am a mood reader. I jump around reading or rereading books that reach out to me from the shelves all around this house. And I wanted the series to be enjoyable and fun and to have an element of spontaneity. So that is why I am not going through them in order, because that feels too forced for my own sensibility. And that also means that you can just watch these videos as you see them. It doesn't need to be episode 1, 2, 3, and so forth. So there is this wonderful website, Penguin First Editions, and there are contributors to this website, such as one of the biggest Penguin collectors, Jules Burt. He also has a great YouTube channel, check it out. But yeah, this is a really great website. It's not affiliated to Penguin itself, but here you have full lists of the whole set of 3,000 books. And yeah, you can just start right at the beginning. And there's little tidbits of information. Now, why shift from 1,000 to 3,000? First of all, I have a special connection with book number 1,700. We are going to discuss it today. This book, I think, was a kind of gateway into classic literature for me. It also was a spark of my own urge, my own desire, my own sense of being impelled to write. And this book is, in the 3,000 series. So many of my favorite books were actually published between book number 1001 and book number 3000. So that was one reason for extending the series. I've already read loads of books from the later stages of the 3000. So I'm actually not extending the amount of reading that I need to do by a ridiculous amount. Some people commented in the first video saying, well, isn't this a stressful challenge, or, you know, aren't you going to struggle to finish this? I love a mountainous reading challenge. And in fact, it's not about getting to the peak for me. It's really just about crawling over snowy ledges and peering down into the abyss like Frodo carrying the ring to Mordor. I just want to, although he did get there in the end, I hope I'm not spoiling that for anyone that hasn't read or watched Lord of the Rings. I'm not too concerned to fling the ring of completion into the smoldering pit of the YouTube algorithm of Mordor, just going along with it because it's fun and enriching and it's a big adventure. So for me, the difference between 1,000 and 3,000, it doesn't matter. Yeah, and the next thing is, like I said, I'm a mood reader. Having 3,000 books within this range gives me a lot more choice on a sort of week-by-week basis. It makes it easier to get new material. Some of the books in the first 1,000 especially are very hard to come by. That's also part of the fun, hunting them down, but I certainly don't want to feel like I have to spend more time hunting for obscure, out-of-print, hard-boiled crime novels when I could be just up to the eyeballs in Proust or Graham Greene or Nadine Gordimer or any of the other cornucopia of incredible writers who I love, who are published in this first 3,000. There are many writers I love who were writing in this sort of mid 20th century who don't get a look in, and that's a crying shame. Maybe at some point I'll make a video discussing that. Also, when I saw that book number 3000 was Ulysses, I thought, Ulysses is just an extremely important book for the history of Western and world literature. So there's also a really special story behind Alan Lane publishing Ulysses at number 3000. So as an editor early on in his career, he really wanted to publish Ulysses. The book was banned in the UK. It was published in France. And he didn't quite manage to pull it off earlier on in his career, but by the time the mid-1960s rolled around, he had achieved success with this incredible series, and he was able to fulfill his dream of publishing Ulysses, unabridged, uncensored, and that was a big triumph for him and for freedom of speech and for James Joyce, for the English literary tradition. If I was only doing the first 1,000, I couldn't include Ulysses as part of this series, and I definitely plan to. So without further ado, let's jump into another 10 books from the series. First up is number 4, Madame Claire by Susan Ertz. This was a really whimsical, light, sunflowery novel about a lady in her 70s, nicknamed Madame Claire, but she's actually Lady Gregory, but her grandchildren call her Madame Claire. She reconnects with an old beau from earlier in her life, a kind of lost love, and they exchange letters. So it is a epistolary novel in some sense, but it's not only a novel structured through letters. There are also just regular realist narrative and dialogue and so forth. It hasn't exactly aged supremely well, which is probably why it's out of print. But it's really a summary, lyrical, pleasurable, snackable novel, and I would really recommend this. This is a great beach read. This is a great summer, laying in the park read. Ertz and her eponymous character, Madame Claire, reflect on growing old in a very positive light. Madame Claire embraces old age, she embraces having wisdom, and the subtext of this book is war, World War One, and sort of the whispers and rumors and echoes of further bloodshed and war to come. So there's a kind of dark undercurrent, but with a very sweet, light playfulness as the body of this novel. I really recommend this. Susan Ertz had one British parent and one American parent, so she grew up between the States and the UK. She was quite prolific in her lifetime and popular, but she's out of print now. At the age of 18, she decided to just base herself in the UK and married an army officer and had a successful writing career. That's what's so great about the series. Some of these forgotten works are just a real pleasure to read. So next is a book that I don't actually have my copy of. I don't have copies of all of the books I've read in my life, and this next book is number 14, The Thin Man by Dashiell Hammett. There's actually 2 Dashiell Hammets that I'm going to discuss today, and I might as well just do them alongside each other. I do not have copies of either of them at this point in time. They are number 14, The Thin Man, and then his most famous work, number 1887, The Maltese Falcon. Yeah, the Maltese Falcon is what Dashiell Hammett is most famous for. But both of these novels are hard-boiled crime fiction, this kind of world-weary, strong and silent detective who somehow is just always talking, even though he's also comes across as being strong and silent, so it's a strange paradox. But yeah, it's really like the kind of stuff that goes into making crime films as well. The "you're talking to me, tough guy" kind of spiel. And there's like these kind of flappers and dames in distress. So yeah, in terms of like gender relations, he's very out of date, and I can understand that, you know, for some people reading these books now would be quite grating. But yeah, taking them on their own terms in terms of hard-boiled crime fiction, I'd say The Maltese Falcon is a little bit more noirish. It's set in San Francisco. You've got the kind of fog of the bay and the sort of men with coats and hats pulled down tightly, sort of walking the dark, foggy streets. Whereas The Thin Man is actually set in New York, but he doesn't really bring the character of the city in to that novel. It takes place very much in hotel sitting rooms, and yeah, pretty much that's it. They're always drinking, they're always smoking, and these tough guy kind of protagonists go about their jobs of solving the crimes. The Maltese Falcon is about this supposedly almost priceless bird that is covered in jewels and diamonds and gold, and that a bunch of shady underworld drug lords or criminals are on the hunt for. They're both well executed. The Maltese Falcon is especially finely woven and structured. There is a sort of symmetry to them. Next up is number 1274, Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. This is a classic of South African literature. I would even, though I would struggle to call it anti-apartheid literature. It was published really in the thick of apartheid, 1948. So it was a long, long way before Nelson Mandela and the ANC coming to power and the overthrow of the apartheid regime at the end of the 1980s and early 1990s. So it was really a long way from that, and I found it to be quite disappointing. It's got a big reputation. It's about a Zulu parson traveling around dealing with the evils of racial discrimination, but I just found both the Zulu parson and all the characters to be a bit wooden, a bit stereotypical, a bit kind of almost placeholders for ideas rather than living, breathing, complex characters. I found the writing to be a little bit stilted. Next is number 1351, Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception. I should say as well that my purpose in reading these 3,000 books is not to read first editions per se. Happy to read first editions if that's all I can get hold of, or if I already owned a few first editions from the Penguin series, but I just want to read these 3,000 titles in whatever form I can get them in. And so The Doors of Perception, I've just got this vintage edition. And yeah, so the band, The Doors, Jim Morrison's band, The Doors, if you didn't know, they got the name of the band from this book, The Doors of Perception. So in 1953, Aldous Huxley took mescaline, which is a hallucinogenic drug, and he was guided by a psychiatrist, and it was done very scientifically. And if you're expecting a wild and woolly One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest type of thrill, then that's not really what this book is about. He's quite meticulous in his descriptions of his experience of being on this drug. He did this just before the explosion of psychedelics that led to, the 60s, the free love movement, and Woodstock sort of love revolution, whatever you want to call it. So he was quite early, and they were still taking hallucinogenic drugs, like on campuses as part of psychoanalytic and pharmacological research, which is quite strange to think of. And for him, it was about sort of seeing objects in a purer light somehow. The way that he describes seeing the vase of flowers and the window panes and the glass and the chairs and the people around him, it makes me think of Heidegger's notions of ready to hand and present at hand. So for Heidegger, when objects are ready to hand, it's when we are just so caught up in our thoughts and daily hustle and worries and anxieties that we don't really take notice of the world and the objects around us. But when something is present at hand, it is when we are acutely aware of an object's thingness and of the world as this external space in which we are moving through and which we are attuned to. And for Heidegger, it often took the breakdown of a thing's functioning to bring us into that awareness, to make an object present to hand. So let's say you wake up in the morning and you're like half asleep and you like just push the coffee machine and you drink your coffee. You don't really think about that object and the coffee beans that have come from the other side of the world, ethically or unethically, and are ground into this potent little shot of espresso. But the moment that you stumble up to your coffee machine and you push the button and it doesn't work, suddenly you are brought into an awareness of how much you rely on that caffeine and on the ritual of having a coffee in the morning. And I think that Huxley's sort of mescaline trip made him aware of, wow, we are really surrounded by objects that we are very out of tune with, but that mescaline, he claims, can bring us into a heightened awareness of ourselves and the objects and the other beings around us. Okay, next is number 1484. D.H. Lawrence and it's Lady Chatterley's Lover. I've got this great Penguin Classics edition. Yeah, so this book was banned, and Penguin actually played quite a powerful role in going ahead, acquiring the rights to this book and printing it. And actually, the censors seized and prohibited the printing of these books. And Alan Lane and his team at Penguin actually went ahead and printed like tens of thousands of this book. And those copies were seized and burned. There was this whole court case, and they knew the threats, they knew the risks, and they printed Lady Chatterley's Lover as number 1484 in 1960. And yeah, there was this whole obscenity trial. The books were seized. There was a summons, and Penguin were charged with obscenity for printing this book. But there was a big wave of support for the freedom of speech and of ideas, which is just massive. And they won the court case. The verdict was not guilty, and that bravery and that intellectual, moral, ethical vision to allow the freedom of expression through art turned into a raging success. And the print order went from 100,000 to 300,000 and sold out super quickly. So this was a massive victory for freedom of speech, for the freedom of art, for D.H. Lawrence, even though he was 30 years dead at that point, for Penguin, for Alan Lane. So yeah, it's a really special one. The funny thing is that you think, obscenity, pornographic material, all of this stuff, but when you actually read Lady Chatterley's Lover from today's standpoint, it's quite comically quaint in a way. He talks about like burning loins, like what is the loin, like where is the loin? It's like this kind of vague body part, and it's a very Lawrencean protagonist, this like short, pale man with a little red beard and sort of burning but nameless passion and sexual energy. Even though it's a weird book, it hasn't aged that well. and it's by today's standards, it seems like almost prudish. Yeah, if you read it in the context of its own time, yeah, it was a very influential work. Number 1700, George Orwell's The Road to Wigan, Pier. I also do not have the copy that I once had. I think I read my mom's copy that she had from when she was even in school or in university, and I remember it being an old Penguin edition, so it may have even been a first edition, but that's as may be. This book was very, very influential for me when I was in my early 20s, and I was a bit lost, and I just kind of knew George Orwell from school because we'd read Animal Farm, and I'd read 1984, and I saw this copy in my parents' library, and I read it cover to cover, and it's the story of the mining industry in Britain in the in the first part of the 20th century. It's very detailed. He records the wages of these miners, of the cost of living, how much for bread, how much for tobacco, how much for lodging. He stays in working class lodging houses. He eats breakfast with them. Unforgettable scene in which the landlord hands him his ration of bread with margarine, leaves a blackened thumbprint like on the margarine. He goes down into the mines, crouched over with an aching back, breathing in coal, and he really exposes the horrors of this life and the indignity, the injustice of it, the paltry wages, the atrocious, dangerous working conditions, and in a very rigorous, honest way. And I think that for me was an epiphany of like, wow, there's so much going on in the world, and yeah, if we just read news headlines or look at social media or watch Hollywood films, we miss out on just this huge legacy of individual people going into the world and writing down their experiences or the experiences of others and recording with as much accuracy and honesty as possible the sufferings of the world, the sufferings and the joys. And there's just so much out there to be discovered, to be read, and we just don't come across that in our sort of mainstream culture. But that for me, I was like, wow, I want to find as many books like this and read them, and I also want to go into the world and write down my experiences. And yeah, that was a very transformative book for me, and I'm happy that it's in this 3000 and very happy to discuss it. Next is number 1704, and this is Nadine Gordimer, A World of Strangers. Interesting to compare this book to Alan Lane's Cry, the Beloved Country, both white South African writers, both fighting against apartheid in their own ways. Or this was, I think, her first book or one of her earliest novels, and it was only published 10 years after this one, after Cry, the Beloved Country. So, but it's a story of a young Englishman, Toby, who gets sent to work in Johannesburg, and he befriends this kind of wealthy, white, upper class society, but he also doesn't feel like he is obligated to be with them all the time, and he also makes black friends in the townships, but this is illegal, and so he leads this double life. And it's very well executed. It is political without being overly moralizing. It portrays a complex political and socio-economic world. Yeah, he moves between this world of his poor black friends and his rich white friends, and all of the tensions and the complicities and the hypocrisies and the cruelties and the injustices are all really brought to vivid lived experience in this novel. We'll just do two more then. So number 2135, Truman Capote's Other Voices, Other Rooms. I've got this old cheap Signet mass market paperback. This is a really brooding, moody, atmospheric, gothic book. It's it's a story of a young boy who's been ill and he's recuperating in the American South, with some relatives in this old, crumbling sort of southern aristocracy. And there's a real heavy sultriness and spookiness to the setting. There is real undercurrents of queerness and searching for identity and finding one's own questing and yearning and sort of hunger for belonging and for acceptance. And it's a really gorgeous and unsettling novel by one of my favorite writers, that's Truman Capote. And then finally, number 2821, Graham Greene's short story collection, A Sense of Reality. I've got Graham Greene's collected short stories here, and there are 3 volumes. There's 21 stories, A Sense of Reality, and May We Borrow Your Husband. But A Sense of Reality is, as anyone who's watched my channel knows, I'm a big fan of Graham Greene, but A Sense of Reality I found to be quite disappointing. The stories, some feel a little bit sort of like he just quickly wrote them and sent them off, maybe to pay the bills or whatever. And I enjoy that kind of stuff. You see a different side of a writer, but it's not really his masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination. The first story is called Under the Garden. It's a long story about a guy who goes back to his childhood home decades after his parents have died, and he has one remaining brother who he's more or less estranged from, and he goes and spends the night. His brother is sick. He goes and spends the night at this country house with his brother, and has this dream in which he revisits this part of the garden that he loved to play in growing up. It's this little sort of pond that he remembers as this lake with this dense wooded island in the middle of the lake, but it's just a pond with a little sort of decorative island in the middle of it. But in the dream, he's a kid again, and he crawls down. Oh no, it's not that he has a dream; it's that he remembers a dream he had as a kid, and he starts to sort of recall the dream by writing it down. And in this dream, he crawls down under the roots of the tree on this island and discovers this strange world and these strange characters, and spends sort of an inordinate amount of time with them. And it's really jarring. It's really bizarre and disturbing and kind of slimy and weird, and sort of obviously these symbols of the unconscious, down underneath, and sort of the repression of childhood fantasies and all of that. There's another story in here about a man who encounters an aged, bitter French sort of philosopher or writer, and the sort of disappointment of the man versus the work, and several other stories. Yeah, if I was recommending Graham Greene, this is probably Sense of Reality is probably the last book that I would recommend. But nonetheless, it's Graham Greene. He's got a lot of money in the bank of Bren, and he's always worth reading. But right, I'm going to leave it there. So thanks very much for joining me on this journey. Have you read any of these? What did you think of them? How many of the 3,000 have you read? Let me know. Give me suggestions on what to read for and what to cover in the next video. And thanks very much for being here with me. See you all soon.